Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, meet the Texas superstar plants. Brent Pemberton from Texas A&M explains what it takes for a plant to qualify. On tour, see how to be a superstar to butterflies and bees. Now, let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net. And also from The Blanket, a plant covering designed to be lightweight, breathable, and water resistant to help keep plants warm and dry during harsh winter weather. TheBlanket.com.
When butterflies and bees head for your garden, you know you are on the right track. See how the Comal County Master Gardeners did it at a library where now patrons check out more than books.
At the Bulverde Spring Branch Library, just north of San Antonio, people are checking out more than books and media.
This is not just a library. This is a community center. We have programs for adults, for children. Being sort of out in the country here, it's a place for people to come and socialize.
So when the new building opened in 2008, friends of the library and Comal Master Gardeners dug in to extend the community outdoors in a butterfly garden.
When we were in another building before we built this beautiful new library, I had an idea for a butterfly garden, and I intended that it would be a learning tool for adults as well as children.
They sited it at the edge of the parking lot, enclosing its sanctuary from a harsh view to busy highways below.
They just say, okay, let's do that, and they do it. They don't wait, till, oh, let's think about this and plan it. I mean, they do it. If it doesn't work, they don't do it again. If it does work, how do we improve on it?
We invited the Master Gardeners to come in and help us design, and there were about 12 of them who came over, and we walked out on the property, and one of them brought a spray can and said, okay, here's where we're going to do this bed, and you want it sort of curved. You don't want the hill to block the butterflies. You want to be able to see over the hill, but you need to block the wind. And so it started from that, and then it evolved. We put out a notice to library patrons that we would like plants donated, and we got quite a few. And then among us, we all had some plants. We had a couple of nurseries that donated a few plants. Mostly they came from within our committee. Both Charlotte and Lee are great propagators. We use the free mulch from the county, and then the Friends of the Library set aside some money to be spent on things like the decomposed granite and that sort of thing.
We have a lot of mulch down. We have brought in no soil. This is all native soil, but the mulch has helped to compost it. We've put newspaper under the mulch, which holds the moisture in some and keeps the weeds down.
To select plants, they took a cue from the ones nature had planted on the windy hilltop.
We've tried to keep this garden very natural, without a lot of alien species, and I think we've been true to that.
They went for deer resistance, evergreen structure, and plants that cycle flowers throughout the year for visual pleasure and to feed resident and migratory wildlife.
In the wintertime, a lot of people don't know, but rosemary, either upright or trailing, will bloom with little blue flowers the morning, if you have a sunny morning where it's 70 degrees, after you've had 25 overnight in this part of Texas, you'll have blue flowers on there, and amazingly, you go out at 10 in the morning and there's sulfur butterflies. That's a great nectar source during the winter for butterflies that become active when the temperature gets above 70. One of my favorites is the blue mist flower, which is a fabulous plant for attracting queen butterflies, which resemble monarchs. They're very closely related, but they are here all summer, where the monarchs come through on migration in the spring and make a generation, and in the fall they're going back to Mexico where they overwinter. The queen is here all summer long.
They bookmark each plant.
If it's working here, I can do it at home because the conditions, the climate, the soil is the same. And what the heck's the name of this plant, and so getting those tags on has been, I think, key to the educational experience of seeing the plants, so to speak, in the flesh.
To educate patrons about the garden's butterflies, Friends photographer Charlotte Trussell documents them and their life cycle for a library display. Back outside, patrons go on a discovery hunt to find the eggs and larvae they've come to recognize.
It's sort of like the chicken and the egg. Which came first, the butterfly, the egg, or the larva? You have to account for all different stages. And we have plants here that do draw the butterflies for larvae. Then we have other plants that provide nectar for them once they turn into butterflies. We also have plants that provide neither, but are shelter during bad weather.
Friends of the Library Lisa Reed found a new passion, documenting wildlife with her camera. Lee and his son Michael are well attuned to the garden's visitors. To supplement butterfly food, especially in dormant seasons, Pat Robertson paints a plank with a concoction of beer, brown sugar, and overripe bananas. There's always fresh water. Although the plants don't need much tending, master gardeners like Bill Puckett and Peggy Ham tidy things up and water new plants until they're established. Thanks to a grant, a 40,000-gallon rainwater tank feeds the drip system for established plants. And what's a garden, especially a library garden, without a comfy place to read? With mosaic artistry, the master gardeners styled up an ordinary bench. Thanks to community partnerships, the Bulverde Spring Branch Library bridges knowledge from inside out.
And part of the knowledge we try to impart at this library, as well as the two others in Comal County, are to have it be an example of what will work here. They come out and they look at plants and they say, well, if they can grow it here, I guess I can grow it at home.
In the summer, they even teach classes to the little kids, and they bring them out here and they walk them through and they teach them how to grow things. And so the friends that are doing this, they really have done so much to help the patrons, but the patrons love it. I mean, you see them out here all the time, and they've been adding things like the picnic table and the benches, but you see families with their kids out here reading a book, and the kids just love the butterflies, and they'll find caterpillars and they'll be like, oh, we have to put it back. It's really amazing. It has just been wonderful.
And a couple of times I've come out and there have been children out here that the mother has been saying, we came to get books, and they have said, we have to do the butterfly garden first.
We have had people here from out of state who come and take pictures and say they're going back and they're going to build a garden in their area.
It's always nice to see a community let its heart and soul shine through in a community garden like that. So congratulations to the people who've built that terrific public space. Right now we're going to be turning our attention to Texas Superstars. These are plants tested by Texas A&M to really work in our gardens, and I'm really pleased today to have Brent Pemberton joining us from Texas A&M and AgriLife Research at the Extension Center over there. Thank you so much for being our guest.
It's my pleasure.
Well, let's start off by talking about the program itself, the Texas Superstars. I've seen this for years in the Nursery Center with different plants touted as superstars. How did the program get started and what's its purpose?
Well, it actually started back, I think, around in the 1990s, and the first promotion was actually done in '98 as a Texas Superstar. Some other promotions were done prior to that, but that was the first official Texas Superstar. And from the beginning, the Superstar program has tried to do a couple of different things. One is to find great plants that can be grown all over the state, and the other is to work with industry as far as growers and retailers to know when we're going to do these promotions to make sure that we've got a supply of the plants out there in the industry so that the plants are there when we do a promotion so that people can go in and find them when they want to buy them. And
this is not any kind of a random program. These are really field tested by the Extension Service and are winners in the truest sense.
We trial those at 4 major sites in the San Antonio and Uvalde area and College Station, and then up at the Overton Center, which is where I am near Tyler, and then also in Lubbock at Texas Tech.
Okay. So proven in the ground all around the state. Terrific plants and designed for a whole different array of different kinds of hardinesses, let's say. They could be disease-resistant varieties of plants that we love, or cold-hardy forms of plants that we love.
Right, and sometimes we have plants that are hardy in the southern part of the state, but they're only grown as annuals in the northern part of the state.
Sure.
So,
well,
anyway,
it's a big state, right?
It is, that's right.
It's a big state. You got to, I mean, it'd be hard to find one that works in every single corner.
Right, right.
Well, let's talk about some of the classic ones that have been around for a while, and one that I think of in this regard is the golden bells, or the Tacoma stands, which is ubiquitous now in gardens here in Central Texas, but it was unheard of just 20 years ago.
Right. Greg Grant, who was involved in the program at that time, had found Gold Star Esperanza just growing somewhere along the side of the road and recognized its uniqueness as far as being dwarf and early flowering, as opposed to the straight species.
Right.
And so anyway, all those plants came from that one he found, and it's propagated vegetatively and is now, as you know, it's all over the place. So.
Well, you brought a picture of that, Gold Star Esperanza, and in the foreground is another one of the Texas Superstars, and this is a periwinkle, is that correct? Or?
Yes, or commonly called vinca. And that is the Cora series of vinca, and the uniqueness that it has is the resistance to aerial phytophthora, which is a pretty devastating disease that hit vinca that you're probably familiar with.
A lot of people stopped growing vinca a couple of decades ago because of that.
That's right.
Because they lost them every single year.
That's right.
And so resistant species is obviously something to look for. All right. Well, a couple of other things we want to highlight. There's a plant out that I have to say our producer, Linda Limsford, loves. It's Angelonia. Tell me about this, because I've never used it in a garden setting.
Well, the Angelonia that we have promoted last year is the Serena series, and it's commonly referred to as summer snapdragon. Because if you look at the close-up of the flowers, then you can tell that they kind of look like little snapdragons or whatever, but it's the first series of Angelonias that's grown from seed. And it reblooms a lot better for us than a lot of the other Angelonias that are out there. And also it is easier and cheaper to produce. And so it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Right.
And it's a great plant.
And one that Linda says is like a surefire summer hit that really survives.
That's a great plant, yeah.
Yeah, well, we're all looking for those summer survivors that can take the southwestern exposure and bloom all season long, and it sounds like a great, great plant. Another image that you brought has a number of different winners in it, and including salvia, mystic spires, and one of the tidal wave petunias, and this is a one called Cherry.
Right.
Now let's start with the mystic spires.
Well, the mystic spires blue, there was an indigo spires that gardeners may be familiar with,
Yes,
but this
very
is
popular
actually
plant,
I can't remember if it's a hybrid or if it was gotten by radiation or something like that, but it's a mutation that is much more it's more dwarf in the garden, and so it stands up to the weather. It doesn't flop over and that sort of thing.
That's a big problem with the others, right?
It can be, and it blooms very reliably. It can be sheared if it happens to get a little bit too tall. In fact, I like shearing it just a little bit in late summer, and then it grows and kind of freshens up, and it's beautiful for the fall. So, but it only takes a couple of weeks to get it back in flower. But that's an option.
Okay,
you don't have to do that.
There are lots of great salvias, so that's one to add to the list. Mystic spires. Now, tell me about the tidal wave petunias. There are a number of these that you've developed.
Well, those were developed by the Pan American Seed Company, and the tidal wave series is a trailing type petunia, which is much more vigorous than the traditional petunias that we used to grow.
Right.
And they're a lot tougher when it comes to standing up to our summer conditions, and these particular ones are also very tolerant of alkaline conditions, which is the reason that they became superstars, is because they could be grown in places like College Station and San Antonio.
In Austin.
And Austin,
Right.
without being chlorotic.
Good, good. Well, again, it's great to have those carpets of color like they provide. We see that in another of the images you brought, and this is in combination with Grandma's Yellow Rose, which I love the bright, cheery color on this.
Yeah, that's a great rose. It was actually found by Larry Parsons and Jerry Parsons and Larry Stein. It was actually, they found an original plant in the Nacogdoches area, rose that they had grown for some years, and they found a seedling. And this is Grandma's Yellow. And so anyway, it looks very much like a Floribunda or hybrid tea rose, but it's very tolerant of black spot disease, and it has the double flowers and a little bit of fragrance and everything. So it's really a really nice shrub rose.
Well, it looks beautiful, and in the foreground in that image is the tidal wave silver petunia, which is a striking color.
That's an unusual color. People sometimes wonder how to use that color, but when you put it with purple foliage, it really sets it off.
In the case of this image, it's set off with coleus, right?
Right.
And well, it's a great combination, and then also that combination also works beautifully with the yellow of the rose. I think it's terrific. So
It does, yeah.
Those are some great plants. Now this year, you have a number of new introductions that you're touting, including a new form of gomphrena, right?
Yes, we're doing gomphrena because in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been some new gomphrena series that have come out so that we have a huge choice now in gomphrena. There used to be basically just the old garden form, which is a great plant, by the way, but we now have some that were some dwarf forms that were around, but they're not quite so heat tolerant. But we've got like the Las Vegas series and the Audrey series, which are kind of intermediate and a little bit taller. And then we also have that QIS series, which is an unusual color, which is the reason I brought that picture, because it's a very, very neat plant, very spreading, and it doesn't fall over.
And real
like some of the
briefly,
other
and we have to be
plants.
very brief, Rio Mandevilla is another one of the plants that you're touting this year.
Yes, and the big deal about the Rio Mandevilla is that it's good in containers and it's bushy, as opposed to twining.
Well, and they're beautiful plants and make a great addition to our patios in containers. Some people would plant them in the ground, though maybe a little cold sensitive here in central Texas.
I would think so, and in the ground maybe need a little bit of shade.
Right, okay. Well, these are all fantastic plants, and we didn't get to some of the horizon plants, which are look really exciting, but we really do appreciate you coming by, and thank you for all the work that your whole organization has been doing to bring these terrific plants to all the Texas gardeners.
Well, thanks. We
Again,
enjoy it.
Okay, well, Brent, it's been a pleasure, and coming up next, it's our friend Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Richards, and this is Augie. Our question of the week comes from Nettie Birnbaum, who asks, do we need to clean plastic six-packs or pots and clay pots to reuse them for cuttings or to plant new container plants? And how should we do it, and do we need to sterilize them against disease? Well, Nettie, the answer is a resounding yes. All pots should be cleaned and gently scrubbed before reuse. Although the likelihood of contamination is low, it's always better to err on the side of caution. At the very least, use a warm, slightly soapy liquid and a scrub brush to remove all the remaining debris from the container. You should also, whenever possible, use a weak bleach solution to disinfect any possible microbes, especially in square containers like those six-packs where it's almost impossible to get all of the potting soil out of those corners. To make a 10% bleach solution, simply mix 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Be sure to rinse those bleached containers well and allow them to thoroughly dry before reusing them. And just a reminder about repotting plants. In containers, plants prefer to be crowded, so don't use too large of a container. A good rule of thumb is to move up only 1 container size. For example, from a 4-inch pot to a 6-inch one. When transplanting container plants, and if you are creating a container with multiple different plants, maybe for a splash of annual color near your porch or patio, be sure to fill the container entirely with each plant almost on top of the other one, so that you can barely, if at all, see the soil. Our plant of the week is cenizo, Leucophyllum frutescens. Texas sage, cenizo, is also known as purple sage, Texas ranger, and many other common names. Cenizo is extremely drought tough and needs very little water once it's established. In fact, this shrub does not like wet feet, so be very careful if you're planting it in clay soils. There are different varieties of cenizo to choose from, differing not only in leaf and flower color, but also in height and width. So when choosing this plant, be very careful to get a variety that has the characteristics that you want, especially when it comes to size. Cenizo does not respond well to heavy pruning, so if it outgrows its space in your landscape, you won't be able to prune it back and keep it smaller. Overly pruned cenizos will show lots of dieback, especially in the center of the plant, with only a little growth at the tips. Unfortunately, this shrub is often planted in rows and sheared back to make a hedge. This is not a good practice and will cause the shrubs to look very ugly, twiggy, and almost dead, which they will be, since most of the living tissue will have been removed. The most common cenizos have gray-green leaves with light lavender flowers, but you might also find varieties with a greener leaf and deeper lavender blooms. More rarely, you might even find some with white blooms. Some will also have larger and more flowers than others, giving you a wide palette to choose from. I've even seen Texas sages abandoned by the side of the freeway in El Paso, happily blooming their heads off in the full heat of summer after the rainy season has arrived. These West Texas natives are also known as barometer bush because they bloom in response to heat and relative humidity, leading some to say that they are good predictors of rain. Cenizos require full sun to bloom and be healthy, and really don't tolerate shady areas. To do in your garden this week, plant summer annuals like cosmos, celosia, sunflowers, zinnias, and angelonia. And if you have a lawn, you can go ahead and fertilize it now. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your question or a plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Trisha Shirey for Backyard Basics.
Potting up transplants allows me to straddle garden seasons. I have okra seeded in pots right now to fill in after I harvest my potatoes. My kale and greens are still growing strong, so I'm keeping peppers, eggplant, and tomatoes in pots to grow until the kale and other greens are harvested. I'll put this tomato in a 4-inch pot in a 1-gallon pot, and sometimes even pot them up into a 5-gallon pot until they're ready to go into the garden. Now, basil, parsley, and other herbs are sometimes really crowded in their pots. This little pot right here has 5 basil plants in it, and if I were to plant that in the garden, it just would not do well. So I will pull this out of the pot and very gently tear these apart. You don't want to handle the stems too roughly. And then I'll pot them back up in more 4-inch pots and give them a chance to recover from the shock before I set them out in the garden. And you might even want to trim some of the tops back to help them rebound from stress. Now, when it's time to repot, plants will stop growing. You'll see roots tightly coiled around the base of the plant, maybe even extending from the pot. Maybe the plants are just too spread in the pot and are too crowded. You don't want to move up into too large of a pot. 1 or 2 inches wider and deeper is about right, unless it's a plant like a tomato that you're going to leave in a pot and it's going to get very, very large, or a hibiscus, for example. Spring is a good time for repotting your indoor plants as the plants are really actively growing. It's a good idea to wash old pots with a 10% bleach solution and then rinse them well. If you're using terracotta pots, it's a good idea to water them well before you plant. I like to use a light potting soil, something that's very high quality and drains well. Soilless potting mixes are best for indoor plants only, as they really dry out too quickly outdoors. I do reuse old potting soil. I just add new soil to the top of the pot and add compost to it too, and I'll loosen the soil that's in the pot if it's caked or hard. I'll also take old potting soil and put it in the bottom of very large pots and then put new soil in at the top. If you are concerned about weeds or diseases in old potting soil, you can put it in a black garbage bag, a covered garbage can, or a large covered plastic container and leave it on the driveway or a sunny area for a few days to solarize it. I'm not a fan of cooking soil in my kitchen appliances to kill diseases. It gets really smelly. It only needs to get to about 140 degrees to kill most pathogens and weeds. Now, I do use a piece of fiberglass screening over the hole in the bottom of my pots, and this is available at the hardware stores. That will keep out ants and scorpions and other critters out of your containers, but you don't really need to use pot shards or anything like that. Put a little potting soil in there to start with, and then if you've got a plant that's just really too crowded, it's a good idea to water it a few days in advance so that it's not too dry when you start this process. And you can see this is just really full of roots and needs to be divided. These two plants are just not, the leaves are very, very small. It's just not looking great. So you just gently tease these plants apart. They're pretty fibrous. If you tear any roots, you might want to do some trimming and pruning to get rid of any thing that you've torn. And then just set that into the pot and put fresh potting soil around it, and make sure that you're firming that soil to get out air pockets. You can use a chopstick or even a dibble like this for tight places. If you're doing cactus or spiny things, a tightly rolled newspaper will allow you to pick that up, or you can use a pair of kitchen tongs to handle the cactus during repotting. Once you repot, make sure that you water, make sure the water is coming out of the drain holes, and then keep that plant out of direct sun for a few days and wait several weeks to fertilize. And your pots will all look fresh and new, and your plants will look great. For Backyard Basics, I'm Trisha Shirey.
Visit klru.org/CTG to watch online and find out more. Next week, preview the Wildflower Center Garden Tour. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online, and follow CTG's blog, check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net. And also from The Blanket, a plant covering designed to be lightweight, breathable, and water resistant to help keep plants warm and dry during harsh winter weather. TheBlanket.com.